Maya Chen wiped her trembling hands on her apron, eyes refusing to leave the corner booth. The man in the gray suit had just ordered his third coffee, but it wasn't about the caffeine. Twice he'd checked his watch. 3 times he'd glanced toward the window, and once, just once, those cold eyes had met hers. Enough for Maya to understand. He was waiting for someone, and this meeting wouldn't be pleasant. When the shadow of a black Mercedes stopped outside the door, she knew she was standing at the crossroads of 2 dangerous forces. The bill in her hand trembled. Maybe this was the only chance to save someone's life. Or her own. If you were her, when life hangs by a pen and a few whispered words, would you have the courage to become a silent hero? The fluorescent lights of Riverside Diner buzzed with that familiar electric hum that had become the soundtrack to Maya Chen's nights. 26 years old and working the graveyard shift at a 24/7 joint in downtown Seattle, she'd learned to read people like the menu she'd memorized months ago. Truckers nursing black coffee until dawn. Cab drivers grabbing quick meals between fares. Insomniacs seeking refuge from their own thoughts. But the man who'd walked in 43 minutes ago didn't fit any of those categories. His charcoal suit probably cost more than Maya made in 3 months. His Italian leather shoes had never touched a puddle, and the way he sat, spine straight, hands positioned precisely on the table, screamed military training wrapped in corporate silk. 2 men had followed him in, taking separate tables with clear sightlines to every entrance, their jackets bulging slightly at the left armpit. Maya had seen enough crime shows to recognize the choreography of protection detail. Vincent Torino. She'd recognized him from the news coverage last spring when the FBI had raided 3 of his legitimate businesses, finding nothing but immaculate books and nervous employees who suddenly couldn't remember anything useful. The reporters called him a businessman with alleged ties to organized crime, but Maya could read the subtext. This man owned people the way other people owned furniture. Now he sat in her section, checking an antique gold pocket watch every few minutes, waiting. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but Maya hadn't dared approach with a refill. Something about the silence radiating from his table felt fragile, like stepping too close might shatter whatever careful balance held this moment together. When the door chimed and Detective Robert Hayes walked in, that balance shifted into something far more dangerous. Hayes looked like a man carrying the weight of bad decisions. His rumpled suit hung loose on a frame that had once been broader, his tie askew, the kind of 5 o'clock shadow that suggested he'd started drinking before noon. Maya had seen him here twice before, always alone, always ordering coffee he barely touched while staring at his phone like it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Tonight, his hands shook slightly as he approached Torino's table, and Maya noticed the way the 2 bodyguards' attention sharpened without them moving a muscle. The detective slid into the booth opposite Torino with the careful movements of a man who knew he was walking into a trap but had run out of alternatives. Their voices dropped to whispers immediately, but Maya had excellent hearing and 20 years of experience making herself invisible while adults discussed things they thought she couldn't understand. "The Henderson case is getting too much attention," Hayes said, his voice barely audible over the diner's ambient noise. "Internal Affairs is asking questions I can't keep deflecting." Maya felt her stomach drop as she wiped the same spot on the counter for the 3rd time, straining to catch every word. The Henderson case. She remembered seeing it on the local news. A real estate developer found dead in his luxury condo, officially ruled a robbery gone wrong despite the fact that nothing valuable had been taken. The kind of convenient conclusion that made people ask uncomfortable questions about who benefited from Henderson's silence. Torino's response was even quieter, but Maya caught fragments. "Loose ends need tying up. Tomorrow night. Make it clean." The casual way they discussed someone's death made Maya's hands shake as she pretended to organize menus that were already perfectly arranged. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes. Growing more heated despite their lowered voices. Hayes pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table with shaking fingers. Torino examined the contents briefly before nodding once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both approval and dismissal. As the detective prepared to leave, Maya realized this might be her only chance to warn whoever was about to become the next loose end. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached their table with practiced professionalism, the kind of smile that said she was just doing her job, nothing more. When she placed the check beside Torino's untouched coffee, she felt his eyes studying her with the intensity of a predator cataloging prey. But Maya had learned to hide her thoughts behind the mask of customer service, and her hand remained steady as she placed the pen beside the bill. Torino's gaze never left her face as he reached for the pen. Maya held her breath, knowing that this moment balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one suspicious glance, and she might join tomorrow night's casualty list. But as she turned to walk away, she caught a glimpse of what she'd done. 2 words circled in deliberate, careful strokes. Kitchen door. Below that, underlined twice, safe exit. It wasn't much, but maybe it would be enough to save a life. Or maybe she'd just signed her own death warrant by revealing that someone had been listening to their supposedly private conversation. The weight of that possibility settled in her stomach like cold stone as she watched Torino fold the bill carefully and slip it into his jacket pocket. When he looked up at her again, something had changed in his expression. A calculation happening behind those dark eyes that made Maya's skin crawl with the certainty that her life had just taken a turn into very dangerous territory. The next few minutes passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Torino left a $100 bill on the table, far more than the $7 coffee warranted, and stood with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention without demanding it. His bodyguards flanked him as they moved toward the exit, but Maya noticed how Torino paused near the kitchen door she'd referenced in her note, his eyes tracking the layout with professional interest. It was a brief stop, maybe 3 seconds, but long enough for Maya to understand that her message had been received and processed. As the trio disappeared into the Seattle night, Maya finally allowed herself to breathe fully for the first time in over an hour. The diner felt different now, as if the very air had been changed by whatever transaction she'd just witnessed and inadvertently influenced. Detective Hayes had left immediately after Torino, but not before Maya noticed the way his shoulders sagged with what looked like relief mixed with resignation. Whatever burden he'd been carrying when he walked in, he was leaving with a different one, the kind that came with accepting that some choices couldn't be unmade. Maya cleared their table with mechanical precision, her mind racing through the implications of what she'd overheard and done. Someone named Henderson was already dead. Someone else would be targeted tomorrow night. And now she, a nobody waitress from a neighborhood where people minded their own business to stay alive, had inserted herself into the middle of what felt like a very deadly game. The rational part of her brain screamed that she should forget everything she'd heard, pretend it was just another late-night conversation between insomniac strangers. But the image of that manila envelope and the casual way they discussed ending a human life kept replaying in her mind like a broken record. As Maya finished her shift and locked up the diner at 6 a.m., she couldn't shake the feeling that invisible eyes were watching from the shadows between streetlights. The walk to her beat-up Honda felt longer than usual. Every sound amplified by paranoia, she told herself, was probably just exhaustion and too much caffeine. But when she reached her car and found a single white business card tucked under the windshield wiper, her blood turned to ice water. The card was expensive. Heavy stock, raised lettering, no company name or logo. Just a phone number and 2 words printed in elegant script. Thank you. Maya's hands shook as she unlocked her car, the card seeming to burn her fingers as she held it. Whatever game she'd stumbled into by circling those words on a coffee shop bill, she was no longer just an observer. Vincent Torino knew who she was, where she worked, and probably where she lived. The question that would haunt her through the sleepless hours until her next shift was simple but terrifying. In a world where information was power and silence was survival, what did a man like Torino want with a waitress who'd just proven she couldn't keep her mouth shut? Maya's apartment had never felt smaller than it did that Tuesday morning, every shadow seeming to hide potential threats as exhaustion warred with adrenaline in her bloodstream. She'd managed maybe 3 hours of restless sleep before her upstairs neighbor's television jolted her awake. But even unconscious, her mind had been processing the implications of last night's encounter. The white business card sat on her kitchen table like a loaded weapon, its pristine surface reflecting the weak morning light filtering through blinds she now kept permanently closed. The rational voice in her head insisted she was overreacting. Maybe the card was just Torino's way of acknowledging an observant waitress who'd noticed his need for discretion. But the deeper, more primitive part of her brain recognized the card for what it really was. Proof that she'd crossed an invisible line between anonymity and involvement. In Torino's world, Maya suspected, there were no casual observers, only players and liabilities. She wasn't sure which category she'd landed in, but the distinction might determine whether she lived long enough to find out. Her phone buzzed with a text from her manager asking if she could pick up an extra shift, and Maya stared at the message for a full minute before responding. The smart thing would be to call in sick, maybe take a few vacation days until whatever storm she'd wandered into had passed. But rent was due in a week, her car needed new tires, and her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. Besides, running away might signal guilt or fear to people who were probably experts at reading such emotions. Better to maintain her routine, act like nothing had changed, hope that normalcy would camouflage her growing terror. She agreed to the extra shift and spent the rest of the morning trying to convince herself that serving coffee and pretending last night never happened was a viable survival strategy. The mirror in her bathroom reflected a woman who looked older than her 26 years. Stress etched in the lines around her eyes, and the way she held her shoulders like a shield against invisible blows. The afternoon shift at Riverside Diner felt different from the moment Maya walked through the door. Rosa Martinez, her closest friend among the waitstaff, immediately noticed the tension radiating from Maya's carefully controlled movements. Rosa had immigrated from El Salvador 15 years ago, and possessed the kind of street wisdom that came from surviving in places where the wrong word to the wrong person could end your story. She cornered Maya during the pre-dinner lull, her dark eyes scanning their surroundings before speaking in rapid, urgent Spanish. "Something's wrong with you today, mija. You look like someone who's seen too much and doesn't know what to do about it." Maya wanted to confess everything, but the weight of Torino's business card in her pocket reminded her that knowledge could be a death sentence for innocent people. Instead, she forced a smile and blamed her mood on lack of sleep and too much caffeine, deflections that Rosa accepted with visible skepticism but didn't push further. As evening approached, Maya found herself studying every customer with new paranoia, cataloging faces and searching for the telltale signs that had marked Torino's men. The businessman reading a newspaper in booth 4. Was he really absorbed in the sports section, or was that paper positioned to monitor the front entrance? The woman in the corner nursing a Diet Coke for 40 minutes. Normal customer behavior, or surveillance disguised as boredom. Maya's hypervigilance was exhausting, turning routine interactions into potential threats. But she couldn't seem to dial down the alertness that had kept her alive through a childhood in neighborhoods where danger wore familiar faces. When her phone buzzed with an unknown number at 8:30 p.m., Maya's heart launched into her throat before she even looked at the screen. The message was short and seemingly innocent. "Coffee was excellent last night. Same quality tonight?" But Maya understood the subtext immediately. Someone was asking if she'd maintained the same discretion about what she'd overheard. Rosa noticed Maya's sudden pallor and the way her hands began shaking as she stared at her phone. "¿Qué pasa, Maya? You look like you've seen a ghost." Maya forced herself to delete the message and pocket the phone. But Rosa's concern was impossible to dismiss with another weak smile and excuse. Instead, Maya found herself making a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. She pulled Rosa into the empty break room and closed the door, weighing her words carefully before speaking. "If something happened to me," she said quietly, "something that seemed like an accident but wasn't, who would you call?" Rosa's face went through several expressions: confusion, alarm, and finally a grim understanding that suggested she'd asked herself similar questions before. "Depends on what kind of accident," Rosa replied carefully. "Some accidents you call the police. Other kinds you call nobody. and forget you ever knew the person. Which kind are we talking about, Mija? The weight of Rosa's question settled in Maya's chest like cold lead. She thought about Detective Hayes' shaking hands and the manila envelope that had sealed someone's fate, wondering if the Seattle Police Department had enough clean cops to make reporting a crime worthwhile. I don't know yet, Maya admitted, and the honesty in those words scared her more than any lie could have. Rosa nodded slowly, her expression grave with the understanding of someone who'd navigated dangerous waters before. Then be very careful about finding out, she said. And Maya, maybe you should consider taking a vacation. Visit your mother in Portland for a few weeks. Sometimes the best way to survive a storm is to not be standing in it. Maya wanted to follow that advice, but the memory of Torino's calculating stare and the casual way he discussed ending human life suggested that geography might not provide the protection Rosa was hoping for. The rest of her shift passed without incident, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being observed with the kind of professional attention that missed nothing. Every time the door chimed, her pulse spiked. Every phone that rang made her flinch. By closing time, her nerves were stretched so thin that the sound of her own footsteps in the empty diner made her jump. As she completed her closing routine, counting the register, wiping down tables, checking that all equipment was properly shut down, Maya tried to project an image of calm competence. But when she finally locked the front door and walked toward her car, the weight of invisible eyes felt heavier than ever. The parking lot was well lit but full of shadows, and Maya found herself taking a circuitous route to her Honda, checking reflections in car windows and listening for footsteps that might be following too closely. She was fumbling with her keys when her phone rang, the sudden sound in the quiet parking lot making her nearly drop everything she was holding. The caller ID showed another unknown number, and Maya's finger hovered over the decline button for several seconds before curiosity and a strange sense of inevitability made her answer. Maya Chen. The voice that responded was cultured, controlled, and terrifyingly familiar. Miss Chen, I hope you don't mind the late call, but I wanted to personally thank you for your attentiveness last night. It's rare to encounter someone who understands the importance of discretion. Maya's mouth went dry as she recognized Vincent Torino's voice, the same tone that had casually planned someone's death now discussing her actions with polite appreciation. I'm not sure I know what you mean, she managed, hating how weak her voice sounded in the empty parking lot. Torino's soft chuckle held no warmth whatsoever. Of course not, but hypothetically speaking, if someone had demonstrated both intelligence and restraint in a delicate situation, that person might find themselves presented with interesting opportunities. I hope you have a pleasant evening, Miss Chen. And please, drive carefully. The roads can be quite dangerous this time of night. The Seattle FBI field office occupied a brutalist concrete building that looked like it had been designed to intimidate rather than welcome, its gray facade matching the perpetually overcast sky that blanketed the city 8 months out of the year. Agent Sarah Martinez had been staring at surveillance photos of Vincent Torino for the past 3 hours, trying to build a case against a man who seemed to exist in the spaces between laws rather than breaking them outright. At 34, Martinez had spent the last 8 years of her career chasing organized crime figures who were too smart to leave evidence and too connected to prosecute successfully. Torino represented the new evolution of criminal enterprise. Corporate structures hiding traditional mob activities, legitimate businesses laundering dirty money so efficiently that even forensic accountants couldn't trace the paper trail. But every system had weak points, and Martinez had learned to identify the human vulnerabilities that technology couldn't eliminate. Vincent Torino's weakness might be his need to maintain personal control over certain operations, and that hands-on approach sometimes required face-to-face meetings that created opportunities for law enforcement. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Traffic cameras near Riverside Diner had captured Torino entering and leaving the establishment at unusual hours. Pattern behavior that suggested regular meetings rather than casual dining. Martinez had been conducting loose surveillance for 2 weeks, noting the correlation between Torino's visits and subsequent accidents that befell people who'd been causing problems for his organization. Detective Robert Hayes' involvement had been the confirmation she needed that corrupt law enforcement was facilitating Torino's operations. But proving it required evidence that couldn't be dismissed as circumstantial or coincidental. The waitress who'd served them last night represented a potential goldmine of intelligence, assuming she could be approached correctly and convinced to cooperate. Maya Chen's background check had revealed exactly the kind of person Martinez needed. Financially vulnerable, no criminal history, strong moral compass based on her volunteer work with homeless shelters. Someone who might be willing to do the right thing if properly motivated and protected. Martinez had chosen Riverside Diner for their meeting because familiar environments made potential assets more comfortable, and Maya Chen needed to believe this was a casual encounter rather than a calculated recruitment attempt. She ordered coffee and a slice of apple pie, settling into a corner booth where she could observe Maya's routine while appearing to read case files. The waitress moved with efficient grace, her interactions with customers professional but guarded, the kind of hypervigilance that suggested someone who'd learned to read danger in subtle cues. When Maya finally approached with a coffee refill, Martinez noticed the slight tremor in her hands and the way her eyes constantly scanned the diner's entrances. These were the physical tells of someone carrying stress far beyond what a normal restaurant job should generate. Confirmation that Maya Chen had indeed witnessed something significant enough to alter her baseline behavior patterns. "Busy night last night?" Martinez asked casually as Maya refilled her cup, watching for micro-expressions that might reveal relevant information. Maya's response was carefully neutral, but the slight tightening around her eyes suggested she understood the question's deeper implications. "Not particularly. Pretty standard for a Tuesday." But her voice carried the kind of tension that came from rehearsing denials, and Martinez recognized the signs of someone who'd been thinking about a conversation they shouldn't have overheard. "I'm Sarah, by the way," Martinez said, extending her hand with a smile designed to project trustworthiness rather than authority. "Maya," came the response, accompanied by a handshake that lasted exactly long enough to be polite without encouraging further conversation. Martinez filed away every detail, the calluses on Maya's fingers suggesting second jobs or hobbies requiring manual labor, the lack of expensive jewelry or accessories confirming financial constraints, the way she positioned herself for quick retreat indicating well-developed survival instincts. Over the next hour, Martinez gradually shifted their interactions from casual customer chat to more pointed questions about the diner's regular clientele and any unusual activity Maya might have noticed. She was careful to frame her interest as academic curiosity rather than law enforcement investigation. But Maya's responses grew increasingly cautious as the conversation progressed. When Martinez finally identified herself as an FBI agent, Maya's reaction was immediate and telling. Not surprise, but resignation, as if she'd been expecting this moment since walking into work. "Miss Chen, I think we both know why I'm here," Martinez said quietly, producing her credentials while maintaining eye contact. "You witnessed something last night that put you in a very dangerous position. My job is to make sure that position doesn't become fatal." Maya's laugh held no humor whatsoever. "And what makes you think I witnessed anything worth dying over?" But the question itself confirmed Martinez's suspicions about the nature and significance of whatever Maya had observed. Martinez spent 20 minutes explaining the FBI's interest in Vincent Torino, carefully revealing enough information to establish credibility, while holding back operational details that could compromise ongoing investigations. She described Torino's organization as a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had evolved beyond traditional mob structures, using legitimate businesses and corrupted officials to insulate themselves from prosecution. Detective Hayes' involvement represented a critical vulnerability in Torino's network, but proving police corruption required testimony from credible witnesses who could describe specific criminal acts. "We know you overheard something significant," Martinez said carefully. "The question is whether you're willing to help us ensure that information serves justice rather than getting you killed." Maya's response was immediate and definitive. "I'm just a waitress who serves coffee and minds her own business. Whatever you think I know, you're mistaken." But the fear underlying her denial told Martinez everything she needed to know about the quality of intelligence Maya possessed and the level of danger she was now facing. The conversation might have continued indefinitely if Maya's phone hadn't buzzed with an incoming call that drained the color from her face. Martinez watched as Maya read the caller ID, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid in a way that suggested genuine terror rather than mere anxiety. When Maya declined the call and immediately began clearing nearby tables with mechanical precision, Martinez knew their window for voluntary cooperation was closing rapidly. "Miss Chen, if Vincent Torino is contacting you directly, then you're already involved whether you want to be or not. The only question is whether you're going to be a victim or a survivor." Maya stopped wiping the same spot on the counter and looked directly at Martinez for the first time since the badge had appeared. "Agent Martinez, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you don't understand how these people operate. They don't just kill you, they erase you, your family, your friends, anyone who might remember you existed. So unless the FBI is prepared to relocate my mother, my sister, and everyone I've ever cared about to witness protection, then this conversation is over." Martinez had encountered this type of resistance before, but something about Maya's matter-of-fact description of Torino's methods suggested knowledge that went beyond media reports or casual observation. "How do you know so much about their operational procedures?" she asked carefully. But Maya had already retreated behind the professional mask of customer service, her body language clearly indicating that their unofficial interview was terminated. As Martinez left the diner 40 minutes later, she couldn't shake the feeling that Maya Chen possessed intelligence valuable enough to build a case against Torino. But accessing that information would require more sophisticated approaches than a simple recruitment conversation. The key would be demonstrating that cooperation with law enforcement offered better protection than silence, a challenging proposition when dealing with someone who clearly understood the stakes involved. Martinez made a mental note to research Maya's background more thoroughly, looking for leverage points that might make FBI protection seem more appealing than whatever alternative Torino was offering. In her experience, everyone had pressure points that could be used for motivation, assuming you knew where to apply the force. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel's Georgian room occupied the kind of rarefied air where Seattle's power brokers conducted business over meals that cost more than Maya made in a week. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany paneling and cream-colored leather banquettes, creating an atmosphere of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted its exclusivity. Maya had never set foot in an establishment like this, her usual dining experiences limited to fast food and the occasional ethnic restaurant when Rosa insisted on celebrating someone's birthday. Now she sat across from Vincent Torino in a corner booth that afforded privacy while maintaining sight lines to every entrance, feeling like an imposter in her best dress, a simple black number from Target that looked shabby next to Torino's hand-tailored Italian suit. The waitstaff moved with the kind of choreographed precision that suggested extensive training and even more extensive background checks, their service so seamless it was almost invisible. Maya wondered if they'd been vetted by Torino's organization or if the hotel's natural screening process was sufficient to ensure discretion for conversations that could never appear in court transcripts. Torino had been charming from the moment she'd arrived, standing when she approached the table with old-world courtesy that felt both genuine and calculated. He'd ordered wine without consulting her, a bottle that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget, but somehow made the presumption seem considerate rather than controlling. Their conversation had been surprisingly normal for the first 20 minutes. Seattle weather, the challenges of running a small business, his appreciation for workers who took pride in their craft. Maya found herself relaxing despite her better judgment, drawn in by Torino's ability to project warmth and intelligence while maintaining just enough distance to remind her of the power differential between them. He asked thoughtful questions about her background, her goals, her observations about human nature gleaned from years of customer service, and Maya caught herself answering more honestly than she'd intended. There was something seductive about being treated as if her opinions mattered, as if her insights were valuable rather than just the ramblings of someone society generally ignored. "You know why we're here," Torino said finally, his tone shifting to something more serious without losing its underlying warmth. "The other night, you demonstrated both intelligence and discretion in a situation that could have become complicated." That combination of qualities is quite rare, Miss Chen. Most people are either smart enough to notice important details or wise enough to keep quiet about them, but seldom both. Maya felt her pulse accelerate as the conversation moved into dangerous territory, but Torino's manner remained conversational rather than threatening. "I'm not sure what you think happened," she began, but he held up a hand in a gesture that was polite but firm. "Please, we're both adults, and we both understand that certain conversations require careful handling. What I witnessed was someone who could observe, process, and respond appropriately under pressure. Those are executive-level skills being wasted on minimum-wage work." The compliment felt like bait, but Maya couldn't deny the small thrill of being recognized as capable of more than serving coffee and clearing tables. Torino leaned back in his chair, studying Maya with the kind of attention that felt both flattering and unnerving. "I'm going to make you an offer, Miss Chen. Not a threat, not coercion, but a genuine business proposition. I have several legitimate enterprises that could benefit from someone with your observational skills and ability to blend into different environments. The work would involve exactly what you're already doing: watching people, noting patterns, reporting unusual behavior, but for significantly better compensation and with much more interesting challenges." Maya's mind raced through the implications of what he was suggesting. "What kind of legitimate enterprises?" she asked carefully, though they both knew the question was more about legal liability than actual legitimacy. Torino smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that suggested genuine amusement. "Import businesses, real estate development, restaurant consulting, all properly licensed and regulated, with tax returns that would bore even the most dedicated IRS auditor. What I'm offering is a chance to use your intelligence for something more meaningful than remembering whether someone wants cream in their coffee." The financial details Torino outlined were staggering from Maya's perspective. A monthly retainer that exceeded her annual diner salary, performance bonuses that could pay off her mother's medical debt, health insurance that would cover procedures their current plan rejected as experimental. He presented the offer matter-of-factly, as if such amounts were reasonable compensation for the kind of work he was describing. And Maya wondered if this was how successful people always operated, making life-changing decisions seem like simple business transactions. "Of course, this kind of arrangement would require absolute discretion," Torino continued. "My business competitors are quite aggressive, and they wouldn't hesitate to use personal information against anyone associated with my organization. Your safety, and the safety of your family, would be my responsibility." The way he emphasized family sent chills down Maya's spine, but his expression remained warm and concerned rather than threatening. It was a masterful performance, protection offered as consideration rather than coercion, with the implicit threat wrapped so carefully in apparent care that Maya almost missed its presence entirely. Maya excused herself to the restroom, needing space to process what was being offered and what acceptance might cost. The Fairmont's ladies' room was as luxurious as everything else in the hotel, all marble surfaces and gold fixtures that reflected her image back in fragments. She looked pale, overwhelmed, out of her depth in ways that went far beyond the expensive surroundings. Torino was offering her a chance to change her life completely, to escape the financial stress that had defined her existence since her father's death 5 years ago. But the price wasn't just discretion. It was complicity in whatever Torino's organization actually did behind their legitimate business facades. Maya had grown up in neighborhoods where people made similar calculations every day, weighing survival against morality, choosing the lesser evil when good choices weren't available. She'd sworn she would never face that kind of decision. But here she was in a hotel bathroom that cost more to maintain than she earned in a month, considering whether to cross a line she'd always believed was uncrossable. When Maya returned to the table, Torino was examining an antique pocket watch that caught the light like captured gold. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said without looking up. "He carried it through 3 wars and 40 years of building the foundation that became my inheritance. Time is the only currency that matters, Miss Chen. How we spend it determines who we become." He closed the watch with a soft click and slid it across the table toward her. Consider this a signing bonus, regardless of your decision. A reminder that every moment we waste is irreplaceable, and every opportunity we decline may not come again. Maya stared at the watch, knowing that accepting it would represent a commitment she wasn't ready to make. Mr. Torino, I appreciate the offer, but I need time to consider the implications. This isn't the kind of decision I can make over dinner, no matter how good the wine is. Torino nodded as if he'd expected this response, his smile suggesting approval rather than disappointment. Of course, take all the time you need, but don't take so much time that other people make the decision for you. And Miss Chen, keep the watch. Whether you work for me or not, you've earned it through your actions the other night. As Maya prepared to leave, Torino stood and extended his hand in a gesture that felt both formal and final. One more thing, he said, his grip firm, but not uncomfortable. You mentioned Agent Martinez the other day. She's an intelligent woman, but she operates under certain constraints that limit her ability to protect people in your situation. If you decide to continue our association, I'd suggest limiting your contact with law enforcement until you're certain where their loyalties actually lie. The corruption in Seattle runs deeper than most people realize, and the distinction between protection and manipulation isn't always clear. Maya nodded, understanding the warning implicit in his words, and walked away from the table with Torino's watch heavy in her purse and the weight of an impossible decision pressing against her chest. As she waited for the valet to bring her car, Maya realized that her life had just been divided into before and after this conversation, and there was no path back to the simplicity she'd lost forever. Maya's new routine felt like playing chess on 3 boards simultaneously, each move requiring careful calculation of consequences that rippled across multiple games she was still learning to understand. The Riverside Diner remained her official employment, but the work had transformed from mindless routine into active intelligence gathering. Every customer interaction analyzed for significance beyond ordering preferences and tip percentages. She found herself cataloging details that would have been invisible a month ago. Who paid with cash versus credit cards? Which conversations stopped when she approached tables? How often certain faces appeared during specific time periods? The hypervigilance was exhausting, but Maya discovered she had natural aptitude for reading social dynamics and remembering patterns that seemed random until viewed from sufficient distance. Rosa had noticed the change immediately, commenting that Maya moved through the diner like someone expecting trouble rather than just serving coffee. But Maya deflected those observations with references to increased caffeine intake and irregular sleep patterns. Agent Martinez appeared twice more during Maya's afternoon shifts, always ordering the same coffee and pie combination while attempting to restart their recruitment conversation through seemingly casual questions about unusual customers or suspicious activities. Maya had perfected responses that were technically truthful while revealing nothing useful. Yes, the diner attracted interesting clientele. No, she hadn't noticed any specific illegal activities. Certainly, she would contact law enforcement if she ever witnessed actual crimes. The verbal dancing was delicate work that required Maya to project cooperation while maintaining plausible deniability, and she could see Martinez growing frustrated with the careful neutrality of their exchanges. Maya understood that the FBI agent was running out of patience for subtle approaches, which made their interactions increasingly dangerous as Martinez's questions became more direct and harder to deflect convincingly. The professional masks both women wore during these conversations felt increasingly fragile, ready to crack under the pressure of competing loyalties and hidden agendas. Torino's organization operated through layers of separation that Maya was only beginning to comprehend. Her role positioned deliberately at the periphery, where she could observe without being fully implicated in operational details that might prove legally problematic. Her reports were submitted through encrypted messaging apps to contacts she knew only by first names, her observations focusing on law enforcement presence, unusual surveillance, and potential security threats to what she was told were legitimate business meetings. The work felt almost academic in its abstraction, noting that Agent Martinez had visited the diner, recording the license plates of vehicles that lingered too long in the parking lot, documenting the increased frequency of Detective Hayes' appearances despite his supposed retirement from active duty. Maya could tell herself she was providing security consulting rather than criminal intelligence. a distinction that helped her sleep at night even as she recognized its fundamental dishonesty. The financial rewards were immediate and transformative in ways that made Maya's previous concerns seem almost trivial in comparison. Her first payment had been enough to catch up 3 months of overdue bills and replace her car's failing transmission, lifting a weight of constant worry that she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten what financial security felt like. The health insurance that came with her new arrangement had approved her mother's physical therapy within days of application, treatment that their previous plan had denied as unnecessary despite clear medical recommendations. Maya found herself eating better, sleeping in a warm apartment with reliable heat, wearing clothes that fit properly instead of making do with thrift store approximations. The material improvements were seductive precisely because they addressed real needs that had defined her existence for years, making it easier to rationalize her growing involvement with Torino's organization as necessity rather than choice. But the comfort came with a price that extended beyond financial obligation into realms of personal relationships and self-perception that Maya hadn't fully considered before accepting Torino's offer. Rosa's growing suspicion manifested in pointed questions about Maya's improved circumstances and sudden ability to pick up restaurant tabs that previously would have required careful budgeting and shared expenses. Maya found herself creating elaborate explanations for windfalls and bonus payments, lies that felt increasingly hollow even as Rosa pretended to accept them for the sake of their friendship. The deception was corrosive, eating away at connections that had anchored Maya's sense of identity and moral purpose throughout her adult life. She'd always prided herself on honesty, on being the kind of person others could trust completely, but maintaining her new double life required constant calculation of what could be revealed to whom and under what circumstances. The psychological strain of operating between competing loyalties began manifesting in physical symptoms that Maya recognized but couldn't address without raising questions she couldn't answer truthfully. Her sleep became increasingly fragmented, interrupted by anxiety dreams where she was simultaneously pursued by law enforcement and criminal organizations, each group demanding information she couldn't provide without betraying the other. Her appetite decreased despite her improved ability to afford quality food. Her stomach often tied in knots that made eating feel like a chore. Rather than pleasure, Maya found herself checking reflections in windows and mirrors, looking for signs that she was being followed or observed. Hypervigilance that would have been appropriate for active criminals but felt excessive for someone who told herself she was merely providing business intelligence. The watch Torino had given her became both talisman and burden, its weight in her pocket a constant reminder of commitments she'd made and lines she'd crossed in service of what she hoped were justifiable ends. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when Maya recognized Detective Hayes entering the diner 40 minutes before his usual arrival time, his demeanor suggesting urgent rather than routine business. She'd been tracking his patterns for 3 weeks, noting that his visits correlated with specific types of cases reaching critical phases in their investigation timelines, and the early appearance suggested acceleration in whatever timeline he was operating under. Maya sent her required notification through the encrypted app, but this time included additional details about Hayes' apparent stress level and the fact that he'd checked his phone 17 times in 15 minutes rather than his usual pattern of checking every 20 to 30 minutes. The response came back within minutes. "Full surveillance, audio if possible." Maya stared at the message, understanding that she was being asked to cross from passive observation into active intelligence gathering that would definitely qualify as criminal conspiracy if discovered by law enforcement. The decision to accept or refuse felt like standing on a cliff edge, knowing that either choice would fundamentally change who she was and could never be reversed regardless of future regrets. The Seattle Police Department's SWAT staging area occupied an abandoned warehouse 6 blocks from Riverside Diner, its interior transformed into a tactical command center with portable lighting, communications equipment, and weapons racks that looked like they belonged in a military operation rather than civilian law enforcement. Agent Martinez stood before a map of the surrounding neighborhood, red pins marking entry and exit routes that had been identified through 3 weeks of surveillance, her voice carrying the controlled tension of someone who'd been planning this operation for months. 24 federal agents and local officers listened as she outlined the simultaneous raids that would target 5 locations associated with Vincent Torino's organization, emphasizing the importance of perfect timing and coordinated execution that would prevent any warning from reaching other sites. Detective Hayes sat in the back row, his expression unreadable, but his posture suggesting discomfort with the proceedings that went beyond normal pre-operation nerves. Maya's intelligence reports had been crucial in identifying the pattern of meetings that suggested tonight would be optimal for catching multiple organization members in compromising positions. Maya herself was unaware of the approaching storm as she completed her usual evening routine at the diner, serving coffee to the handful of customers who frequented the establishment during the quiet hours between dinner rush and late-night crowd. Rosa had left early for a family emergency, leaving Maya alone with the cook and busboy whose English was limited enough that meaningful conversation was unlikely. The encrypted phone buzzed with an urgent message that made Maya's blood run cold. Federal operation imminent. Estimate 15 minutes. Kitchen exit compromised. Need alternative egress. Maya stared at the words, realizing that her reports had somehow enabled law enforcement action against the people who'd been paying her, and that she was about to be caught in the crossfire of a situation she'd helped create. The loyalty she owed to both sides was about to be tested in ways that would determine not just her survival, but her fundamental identity as either protector or betrayer of the people who'd trusted her with their secrets. The first indication of approaching disaster came through the kitchen window as Maya glimpsed unmarked vehicles positioning themselves with the kind of precision that suggested careful choreography rather than random traffic patterns. Her hands shook as she reached for the phone to warn Torino, but hesitation paralyzed her as she considered the consequences of each possible action. Warning Torino would confirm her betrayal of law enforcement and make her an active accomplice in evading federal arrest. But remaining silent would betray people who treated her with more respect and financial consideration than she'd ever received from supposedly legitimate employers. The moral calculus was impossibly complex, but Maya's instinctive sympathy lay with the organization that had lifted her from poverty rather than the agency that had approached her only when they needed something from her. She dialed Torino's number with trembling fingers, knowing that this moment would define who she really was beneath all her careful rationalizations and self-deceptions. "Vincent, it's Maya. They're coming, maybe 10 minutes. The words came out in a rush, but Torino's response was calm and controlled, suggesting he'd been expecting this possibility and had contingency plans already in place. "Which agencies?" he asked, his tone professional rather than panicked. "FBI, probably local police backup. Multiple vehicles, coordinated positions. They're not just serving warrants. This is a full tactical operation." Maya could hear activity in the background of Torino's call, voices issuing quiet orders and the sound of equipment being moved, the efficient bustle of an organization that had drilled for exactly this scenario. "Maya, listen carefully. Exit through the loading dock behind the kitchen. There's a storm drain access point 30 yards east of the building. Move the grate and follow the tunnel north for 2 blocks. You'll come up in the parking garage beneath the Westfield Tower. Take the elevator to the 15th floor and wait in the coffee shop. Someone will find you there." Maya wanted to ask how he knew about hidden infrastructure beneath the diner, but sirens in the distance suggested that questions would have to wait for survival. The next 20 minutes unfolded like a fever dream where Maya found herself moving through spaces she'd never known existed beneath the familiar geography of her neighborhood. The storm drain was larger than she'd expected, clearly designed for more than just water management, and Maya wondered how many other people had used this route to disappear when normal exits became dangerous. Her path underground was lit by emergency lighting that suggested regular maintenance and recent use, confirmation that Torino's organization had infrastructure for exactly these contingencies. The sound of tactical operations echoed through the grates above her, shouted orders, vehicle doors slamming, the distinctive crack of flashbang grenades designed to disorient rather than injure. Maya moved through the darkness, knowing that her choice to warn Torino had irrevocably altered her relationship with law enforcement and probably made her a fugitive from people who'd once offered her protection in exchange for cooperation. Maya emerged in the Westfield Tower parking garage exactly as Torino had predicted, the precise accuracy of his directions suggesting familiarity with emergency procedures that went far beyond casual planning. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt surreal after crawling through storm drains, her reflection in the polished metal doors showing someone who looked like a refugee from circumstances beyond her understanding or control. The coffee shop was closed, but the door opened at her approach, revealing a space that had been converted into a temporary command center with multiple phone lines and computer screens showing surveillance feeds from around the city. Vincent Torino stood beside a table covered with maps and documents, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled but his demeanor calm and focused as he coordinated responses to what was clearly a coordinated law enforcement assault on his organization. When he saw Maya, his expression shifted to something that might have been gratitude mixed with professional assessment of someone who'd just proven their loyalty under extreme pressure. Agent Martinez's operation was more comprehensive than we'd anticipated, Torino said without preamble. 7 locations targeted simultaneously, 43 federal agents involved. Coordination with local law enforcement that suggests months of planning. Your warning saved approximately 30 people from arrest tonight, Miss Chen. That kind of loyalty deserves recognition. Maya wasn't sure whether to feel proud or horrified by the implications of what she'd accomplished. But Torino's calm acceptance of the situation helped stabilize her emotional response to events that felt completely beyond her normal experience or judgment. "What happens now?" she asked, genuinely uncertain whether her actions had made her a hero or accomplice in the eyes of different organizations that would judge her by contradictory standards. Torino smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, the expression carrying warmth that seemed genuine rather than calculated. "Now we discuss your future with an organization that values loyalty above almost every other quality. And we consider what kind of response tonight's aggression might require to ensure it doesn't happen again." The FBI Seattle field office felt like a tomb at 4:30 in the morning, its fluorescent-lit corridors echoing with the footsteps of agents who'd returned from the most comprehensive operation in recent memory, with almost nothing to show for months of preparation and surveillance. Agent Martinez sat in her cubicle staring at arrest reports that told the story of a perfectly executed raid on mostly empty locations, as if Torino's organization had been warned hours or even days before federal agents moved into position. 3 low-level associates had been arrested on minor charges that wouldn't hold up in court. 2 locations had yielded evidence of legitimate business activities that were completely legal despite being morally questionable. And the remaining sites had been abandoned so recently that coffee was still warm and computers hadn't finished their shutdown sequences. The coordination required for such complete evacuation suggested either incredible luck or advance warning from someone with access to operational details that should have been compartmentalized among trusted personnel. Detective Hayes had disappeared entirely, his phone going straight to voicemail and his apartment appearing hastily abandoned when uniformed officers conducted a welfare check at Martinez's request. His absence confirmed suspicions about corruption within the Seattle Police Department, but provided no actionable intelligence about how that corruption had been used to compromise federal operations. Martinez found herself reviewing personnel files and operational security protocols, looking for weak points that could have allowed information to reach Torino's organization in time for coordinated evacuation. The list of people with advanced knowledge of the raids was disturbingly long when she factored in support staff, technical personnel, and local law enforcement liaisons, but Maya Chen's name kept appearing in her calculations as someone with both access to relevant intelligence and motivation to provide warning. The Waitress had been perfectly positioned to observe federal surveillance, catalog operational patterns, and communicate with Torino's organization through channels that wouldn't be monitored by law enforcement. Maya Chen's apartment was empty when Martinez arrived with a search warrant at 6 a.m., the space appearing to have been vacated with planning rather than haste. Clothes were gone, but furniture remained, suggesting a departure that was temporary rather than permanent, but organized enough to avoid leaving useful evidence behind. Martinez's examination revealed sophisticated tradecraft in what appeared to be careful elimination of any documents, electronics, or personal items that might provide insight into Maya's activities or associations. The apartment had been cleaned with professional thoroughness that removed fingerprints from surfaces where they should have been abundant. and a sweep with electronic detection equipment revealed signs that surveillance devices had been removed recently. Maya Chen had either received expert training in operational security or been assisted by people who understood how to eliminate evidence that could be used in criminal prosecutions. The search of Riverside Diner proved equally frustrating, yielding nothing more incriminating than employment records that showed Maya's declining hours over the past month and a personnel file that contained only routine information about her background and performance. Rosa Martinez, Maya's closest coworker, claimed complete ignorance about any unusual activities or associations, but her nervous demeanor suggested knowledge she was unwilling to share with federal investigators. The diner's owner produced security footage that showed Maya's final shift, her movements appearing normal until she received a phone call that visibly distressed her, followed by her hasty departure through the kitchen exit shortly before federal agents arrived. The timing was too precise to be coincidental, but proving criminal conspiracy would require evidence that Maya had knowingly provided intelligence to facilitate organized crime activities rather than simply warning a friend about approaching danger. Torino himself had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed, his legitimate businesses continuing to operate under the management of associates who professed ignorance about his current whereabouts and expressed concern for his welfare given the recent law enforcement attention. His properties had been legally transferred to corporate entities weeks before the raids. His bank accounts closed and assets liquidated through transactions that appeared suspicious in hindsight but had been perfectly legal when executed. The sophistication of his disappearance suggested preparation that had begun long before Martinez's investigation reached operational stages, indicating either remarkable prescience or access to law enforcement planning through sources that remained unidentified. The possibility that corrupt officials had provided ongoing intelligence about federal investigations made Martinez question the security of her own operation and wonder how many other cases had been compromised by leaks within law enforcement agencies. Martinez spent the following weeks conducting interviews with every person who'd had access to operational details about the raids, using polygraph examinations and financial background checks to identify potential sources of the security breach that had allowed Torino's organization to evade capture. The investigation revealed concerning patterns of unexplained income among several local law enforcement personnel, but proving criminal conspiracy required evidence that went beyond circumstantial correlations between federal operations and suspect financial activities. Detective Hayes' disappearance had eliminated the most obvious source of leaked intelligence, but Martinez suspected that corruption within Seattle law enforcement extended beyond one compromised detective to include a network of officials who provided ongoing protection for organized crime activities. The scope of that corruption made her question whether justice was possible within existing institutional structures that seemed designed to protect people like Torino from accountability for their actions. 6 months after the failed raids, Martinez received notification that she was being transferred to the FBI's Phoenix office, a lateral move that effectively ended her investigation into Vincent Torino's organization while maintaining the fiction that her career hadn't been damaged by operational failures. The transfer came with commendations for her investigative work and assurances that other agents would continue pursuing leads she'd developed. But Martinez understood that her case was being quietly closed rather than actively pursued by investigators who might achieve better results. Her final report documented the sophisticated criminal enterprise that had operated successfully in Seattle for years, protected by corruption within law enforcement and insulated from prosecution by legal structures that favored wealthy defendants capable of hiring expert legal representation. Torino had won this round completely, demonstrating that organized crime could adapt to modern law enforcement techniques while maintaining traditional advantages of corruption, intimidation, and financial resources that exceeded government capabilities. As Martinez prepared for her transfer, she couldn't shake the conviction that Maya Chen held the key to understanding how Torino's organization had achieved such complete victory over federal law enforcement. The waitress had disappeared as thoroughly as her employer, but Martinez suspected that Maya represented a new evolution in criminal recruitment. Ordinary citizens who could be converted into intelligence assets through financial incentives rather than traditional coercion methods. This approach was more subtle and potentially more dangerous than classical organized crime structures, creating networks of apparently legitimate people who could observe law enforcement activities and report their observations without recognizing themselves as criminal participants. Martinez made a mental note to warn her Phoenix colleagues about this recruitment strategy, though she doubted they would take seriously warnings from an agent whose last major operation had failed so spectacularly that her career had been effectively ended by its consequences. The morning sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maya's new office cast geometric patterns across hardwood floors that probably cost more per square foot than her former apartment's monthly rent. Riverside Consulting occupied the entire 14th floor of the Columbia Center, its understated elegance reflecting the kind of sophisticated taste that came from having unlimited budgets and professional designers who understood that real power whispered rather than shouted. Maya stood behind a glass desk that seemed to float in the air, studying quarterly reports from legitimate businesses that somehow generated enough revenue to justify their existence while serving purposes that weren't reflected in any official documentation. 6 months had transformed her from a waitress struggling to pay bills into a business executive whose opinions carried weight in decisions that affected dozens of employees and millions of dollars in commercial transactions. The change felt surreal some mornings, like inhabiting someone else's life through an elaborate costume that might be removed at any moment to reveal the poverty and powerlessness that had defined her previous existence. Vincent Torino appeared in her office doorway with his usual perfect timing, arriving for their weekly conference without announcing himself or waiting for permission to enter. Their relationship had evolved into something that resembled genuine partnership rather than employer-employee hierarchy, though Maya never forgot that the courtesy and respect she received were privileges that could be withdrawn if her usefulness ever diminished. Torino had kept every promise he'd made during their first dinner conversation, providing financial security, interesting work, and protection that extended to her family without their knowledge or consent. Maya's mother had received a full scholarship to a rehabilitation program that addressed her chronic pain issues. Her sister had been accepted to graduate school with funding that didn't appear on any application she'd submitted, and Maya herself lived in an apartment building where security was so discreet she'd never seen the guards she knew were watching everyone who entered or left the premises. "The Phoenix situation has been resolved," Torino said without preamble, settling into the chair across from Maya's desk with the relaxed posture of someone discussing routine business rather than potentially life-altering events. Maya knew better than to ask for details about what resolved meant in the context of Agent Martinez's forced transfer and the subsequent cancellation of federal investigations that had threatened their organization's operations. She'd learned that certain knowledge was dangerous even for trusted associates, and that Torino protected his people partly by limiting their exposure to information that could make them liability risks if law enforcement ever succeeded in developing effective prosecution strategies. "What's our status with local agencies?" Maya asked instead, focusing on intelligence that was relevant to her operational responsibilities rather than satisfying curiosity about methods she preferred not to understand completely. Torino's smile suggested approval for her discretion about sensitive topics that could complicate their relationship if examined too closely by either of them. "Seattle Police Department has implemented new protocols for investigating organized crime that make federal cooperation significantly more difficult. Detective Hayes' replacement is someone we've worked with before, and the FBI's local task force has been disbanded pending budget reviews that will probably continue indefinitely. Your early warning system has proven so effective that we're considering expanding similar operations to other markets where law enforcement attention might become problematic." Maya nodded as if this was ordinary business planning rather than discussion of criminal conspiracy that spanned multiple jurisdictions. But she'd learned to compartmentalize information in ways that allowed her to function professionally while maintaining plausible deniability about activities that existed in legal gray areas or darker regions entirely. The conversation shifted to legitimate business concerns that occupied most of Maya's working hours, reviewing applications for small business loans, analyzing market trends in legitimate industries where their organization maintained investments, coordinating with attorneys who ensured that all corporate activities remained within legal boundaries regardless of their ultimate purposes. Maya, had discovered natural aptitude for financial analysis and strategic planning that had never been tested during her previous employment in service industries that demanded physical endurance rather than intellectual engagement. Torino had provided access to educational resources and professional development opportunities that were transforming her from someone who executed other people's decisions into someone capable of making complex judgments about resource allocation and risk management. The work was intellectually stimulating in ways that made her former life seem like sleepwalking through days that blended into meaningless routine. But success came with isolation that Maya hadn't anticipated when she'd accepted Torino's offer of financial security and professional advancement. Her relationship with Rosa had become impossible to maintain once Maya's improved circumstances made her previous life seem like an elaborate deception. And forming new friendships was complicated by the need to maintain careful boundaries around information that could compromise operational security if shared with people who lacked appropriate clearances. Maya spent most of her time alone or with colleagues whose loyalty to the organization made genuine personal connection too dangerous to attempt, creating a kind of professional loneliness that wealth and interesting work couldn't completely address. She'd gained financial security and lost the simple human connections that had anchored her identity before money and power replaced poverty and powerlessness as the defining characteristics of her existence. Maya's personal phone buzzed with an unknown number that made her blood pressure spike before she recognized the voice of Agent Sarah Martinez calling from Phoenix. "Miss Chen, I hope you're enjoying your new career in business consulting. I wanted you to know that our investigation has been officially closed, but certain patterns we identified suggest that organized crime recruitment has evolved beyond traditional methods to include apparently legitimate business opportunities that gradually compromise people who don't realize they're being converted into criminal assets. I thought you might find that information professionally relevant." Maya listened without responding, understanding that Martinez was offering both warning and absolution while acknowledging that prosecution was no longer possible given the political realities that protected people like Torino from accountability for their sophisticated criminal enterprises. "Agent Martinez," Maya finally replied, "I appreciate your call, but I think you may have me confused with someone else. I'm just a business executive who helps small companies navigate regulatory compliance issues. I hope you find Phoenix more professionally rewarding than Seattle." The conversation ended with both women understanding that Maya had chosen her side definitively, accepting whatever moral compromises were necessary to maintain the life she'd built through association with people whose methods she preferred not to examine too closely. As evening approached and Seattle's skyline began twinkling with lights that represented thousands of people living ordinary lives without her complicated relationship with power and morality, Maya reflected on the choices that had brought her to this place of financial security and professional accomplishment. She'd saved lives by warning Torino's organization about federal raids, but she'd also helped criminal enterprises evade accountability for activities that probably harmed other people whose faces she would never see. The moral calculus was impossible to resolve satisfactorily, but Maya had learned to live with ambiguity rather than demanding clear distinctions between right and wrong that didn't exist in the complex world she now inhabited. Vincent Torino had offered her a chance to matter in ways that went beyond serving coffee and accepting tips, and she discovered that mattering required accepting responsibility for consequences that extended far beyond her individual choices and actions. Sometimes, survival required writing new rules for games, where the traditional boundaries between victim and accomplice, protection and complicity, hero and villain were too blurred to provide reliable moral guidance. Maya Chen had learned to navigate those blurred boundaries with the same careful attention she'd once devoted to memorizing coffee orders and managing difficult customers, understanding that every choice carried weight that could determine not just her own fate, but the fates of people whose lives intersected with hers in ways both visible and invisible. The watch Torino had given her months ago still ticked steadily in her desk drawer, measuring time that belonged to a version of herself she could never fully reclaim, marking moments in a life that had been fundamentally altered by the simple decision to circle words on a coffee shop bill and accept the consequences of trying to save someone she'd never met from a death she couldn't prevent through any other means available to a waitress who'd never mattered to anyone important until the night she chose to matter enough to change everything.